All right, welcome everybody to the inaugural Dynamis Athletic Podcast. I'm incredibly honored to have the first guest on the show, Mr. Steve Hall of Revive Stronger. Before I let you introduce yourself, I did want to say something. There was a reason why you were one of the first people that I reached out to. My long-term desire to get into actually hosting podcasting actually started with listening to yours. So for me, this is kind of a really cool full circle moment. I can't remember exactly when you started the podcast. I want to say, would it make sense to say 2017? You were already running it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think around maybe 2017, I had maybe a 30-40 minute drive into work every day. I would listen to the Revive Stronger podcast to and from work for years. So I'm very excited, very honored to have you on here. It's cool for me to have you on the other side of the table, so to speak, being the guest and not the host. So to start with, just introduce yourself. I know I did a little bit, but I want to also know what your background in exercise just as an individual is, and then as well as what your kind of history is as an exercise or fitness professional.
Sure. Cool. Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me, Ryan. It's cool to be here. Cool to know that the Revive Stronger podcast kind of inspired you to want to launch your own. And yeah, the podcast space is just so vast now. Like it's crazy. I remember looking up a recent statistic about I know I don't know, this sounds terrible now I'm saying it, but I think there's just a huge percentage of people don't get past like 2 episodes, and then it's like a huge drop off after like 10 episodes. It's like if you do more than I think it's 20 episodes, you're in like the top 1% of podcasters just because you've stuck around. So yeah, we definitely want to get you past 20 episodes so you can get already just like sneak in there at the top 1%. So yeah, it's really cool to be here. And like you said, normally I'm on the other end, and it's very different being a host versus being interviewed and trying to find your voice and everything. So I think this is going to be an interesting chat to talk about some of those things. But yeah, in terms of my background, I guess do tell me if I'm going too far, but if I talk about my like physical background into like sports and everything, I can take it as far back as like as a child, and I won't talk about it too much because we'll be here all day. But I was always an active kid, so I wasn't that overweight child. Obviously, I think a lot of people that become like a personal trainer or do what we do as a career, like they either came from like being quite overweight and then lost that and then kind of found the kind of the lifestyle, or they're kind of on the other end of the spectrum, maybe very skinny, underconfident, that sort of thing. That was definitely where I came from. It's never been, I've never really struggled with my weight apart from being underweight and very slender. But I was also pretty decent at various sports. Like PE was a subject that I was pretty gifted at. But I have always, and to this day, still lack self-confidence and belief in myself. So I remember that distinctly back in those days. And I think that's partly why I found the gym, because it was something that was very much in my control. There weren't like teammates that would put pressure on me and that would kind of drive me the wrong way. I was also bullied at school, so that never really helped me. And a lot of the people that bully are often like the jocks or whatever, who I would kind of associate or inherently associate with, because I was also good at various kind of physical activities. So yeah, it wasn't the greatest. I tried to pull away from even like further education in terms of like PE, physical education. Like it's something I loved and I was very passionate about, but because of the type of people that were associated with that who were bullying me, I pushed that away. I actually went and studied art instead. So I did still keep up. Like I played football. Actually started going to the gym for the first time when I was not quite 16. I remember saying like to the manager or whatever, the gym manager, I'm 16, because you had to be 16 to be allowed in the weights room. I was like, I'm basically 16. They're like, okay. So they let me train, and I was like almost 16 years old. And basically since I went that one time, I haven't stopped going. And that was really just because I don't know how everyone first gets in there, but a couple of my friends basically went, and I was just like, hey, that sounds cool. I want to try it. And so I tried it. And then you just like start enjoying. And I've always enjoyed the just pushing myself and getting exhausted and the endorphins that gives you, and just being able to like push yourself into the ground type of thing. It's always fun, and seeing the progression as well, something I really love. So yeah, I have that kind of background of really loving kind of physical things and being actually relatively decent at some of them, but not really having the confidence to pursue it any further. So when I went to university, I didn't study any of that. I went and did geography with business, in fact, was my the topic that I did. And I did various like different sports at uni. Like I played, I guess it was soccer that I was playing. And I did like running club, rowing club. I was trying all of it. I was still going to the gym regularly, doing long runs. And whilst I was at university, I unfortunately was on this 10-kilometer run I would do regularly. So I was really into my running. I would have like a Garmin strap with like a heart rate monitor. I would have like my Garmin watch. I'd be able to see my previous best, and it would have like a shadow on the watch. I remember it being really cool where I could see like if I was beating my previous or I wasn't. And every single run I had to beat my previous run. It's just like what I had to do at the time. I had it in my head. And I remember coming to some lights that were flashing amber, and I went for it to try and beat my personal best, and unfortunately a van came and hit me. I don't know if you probably aren't. Are you familiar with this story at all?
Rings a bell a little bit, but I had
Okay,
forgotten about it. Yeah.
cool. Yeah, because I mean, this me talking about my physical background kind of will end up impacting what I've done from like a personal training background as well. So yeah, I was unfortunately hit by this van. And the long-term consequence of that was I was in hospital for about a month. Any of the muscle and basically newbie gains that I had kind of got into that period of time. So that was like from 15 to about 20. So I had some muscle mass on me, but I never really ate enough to be able to like push that further, or like all the intermediate mistakes that people make where they just don't put themselves in a surplus, or they just don't really like take rest days or whatever it might be. I just didn't set myself up for success. But so I lost quite a bit of weight when I was in hospital. I came out like skinny as a rake, really not in good shape, less confident than ever. And I didn't want to do any of these like extracurricular activities. I also was on a fluid restriction at the time because of the damage that had happened to my brain. My body couldn't regulate sodium levels. So I was at very low levels of sodium. So I could only drink, I remember 250 mils was all I could have all day. So I had this little bottle that I would just like nurse drinking throughout the day. The good news is I wasn't as thirsty as you would like a normal person to be. I basically didn't have that drive for thirst, but it's weird not being able to just like, I can just down like, I don't know, a pint of fluid now. It's like, it's no big deal, but that would have set me to potentially have a seizure. Like it would have set me completely the wrong way. So I was kind of getting through that. And so I found myself going back to the gym because it was the place where I felt in control of my body. And I was like, there's got to be a better way to do this than I was before. So I started trying to research, and the best kind of we had at that time was forums, and they weren't great, but there was like the bodybuilding forum. I actually didn't find that one. I found a different one. I started talking to people on there and trying to educate myself. And I found came across bulking, and like I would just eat the world basically to try and regain this weight that I'd lost. And I gained that weight and some. That's probably the worst shape I've been in my life is. Well, I would say the worst shape I've been in my life is straight after the accident and after kind of being in hospital when I was very skinny. But then basically a year after that, I'd already rebounded all the weight that I lost and more because I was just like trying to put on. I was like basically thinking if I eat clean and I eat in a surplus, I'm not going to gain fat. I'm just going to gain muscle. And clearly I was ignoring what I was seeing in the mirror because I was clearly gaining lots of fat during that period of time. I remember being disappointed if I didn't gain like 10 pounds in a week. Like I was literally looking to gain like ridiculous amounts of weight, which worked initially because I think I rebounded quite a lot of the muscle tissue that I lost in hospital. So then I did that, and I still wasn't particularly happy with the results I was getting. So I started doing just like further research. And this is where I started coming across like the likes of Alan Aragon, Lyle McDonald, and I'll just be like digesting every single article Lyle had on his website. On my commute to work at the time, I was just like on the train, just like reading like multiple articles all the time, like downloading them to just reread them. And I remember being at my office job, and like I don't know if you were around, Ryan, with like Ian McCarthy. Do you remember Ian McCarthy?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
He was like one of the initial like he was clearly an educator. Like he talked in a very smart way. He's clearly very intelligent. And there wasn't many people like him at the time. It was more like Matt Ogus wasn't necessarily like a full-on educator. He was more a lifestyle and kind of just sharing his workouts. Whereas with Ian, he was really like going over the science of everything. I was just like, man, I love this. And so I'd be like listening to these YouTube videos at work, making notes whilst I was trying to do my actual job. So clearly, like, just inspired by this and inspired by seeing Matt Ogus also compete as a natural bodybuilder and seeing what is kind of out there in terms of physiques you could achieve naturally. And that was very inspirational to me. So I basically continued to kind of do office jobs within London, and just decided at one point that I was like, right, I'm going to decide to educate myself on the side. On weekends, I would go and do a PT course, and I became a qualified personal trainer. And I was still living at home at the time. I was just like, I actually ended up finding that I'd get an opportunity. Essentially, it was someone who I was in contact with in my hometown, and he was going on holiday, and he was like, I trust you to actually look after my clients whilst I go on holiday. And so there was like a big opportunity there. Weirdly enough, that all fell through, and I just became a PT in my local gym. And that kind of sucked, as you'll probably remember your time all the way back when you're basically like a cleaner. That's like basically half the time you're just cleaning things. I didn't particularly enjoy that. And alongside that time, I was also dieting for a bodybuilding show that I'd committed to. So this is 2014 now. And as I was dieting down, and as I was getting into my kind of, like, I started learning about progressive overload, or you should prioritize compound lifts, and I was squatting, deadlifting, benching. And back then in gyms, like, people were just like curling, like, and doing like dumbbell lateral swings and things like this. So they're seeing me, and I actually remember people gave me the nickname Compound Guy, because no one was doing compound lifts. So I was just like, all he does is compound lifts. So yeah, I started kind of getting a bit of a reputation in that gym from kind of kids maybe a couple of years or so younger than me, and they just like looked up to me as like, wow, like, you're getting shredded, like, you're doing all these big lifts. They wanted to learn. And at the time, I actually had an online coach who was taking me to stage. And so I was like, maybe I could help you guys with your kind of like training and nutrition. You don't want me to one-on-one PT you. You just want to learn about like flexible dieting and macros and like periodized programming. So I started helping people in the local gym. And I liked that because that meant I could sit down at a computer and not have to be up on my feet. So I'd be doing that. I was very ignorant to non-exercise activity thermogenesis, the impact that has on your energy expenditure and therefore fat loss. So I ended up ramping up my cardio, which was just hell. So I'm glad I've learned like step counts matter now. But that basically transitioned into me competing in 2014 for the first time in the best shape of my life after that accident where I was just like, the reason, and you probably do this, I don't know if you coach competitors, Ryan, but if you do, you probably ask them about their why. You ask them like, why do you want to do this? My literal why was, I want to prove to myself that I'm recovered from that accident. Like, it's no longer like I kind of came off the fluid restriction. I came off the medication I was on. And I was like, I want to prove to myself that I can go through what is one of the like most extreme physical endeavors you can do to a human body and then come out of it successfully, which my family were like, my mom was like, you're crazy. This is stupid. Like, you're going to like, you could damage yourself here. And I was just like, I've got to do it. And when I put my head to something, like, I'm going to be doing it. So I executed that and it went fine. But in that process of sharing that journey, and I was documenting it the entire time on social media, on YouTube, kind of vlogs, which were terrible quality back then that you could produce versus like now your iPhone can like shoot in 4K. It's kind of crazy. But I was sharing that. And so my online presence was growing, and I ended up growing a online following a little bit and getting online clients. And my first online clients were mostly like referrals within my local area or people I went to school with. But then as I got results with them, it started growing. So I ended up transitioning away from one-on-one PT and became a full-time online coach. And once I was comfortably earning like roughly about 20 grand a year, I was like, I can move out and I'm going to move in with my girlfriend into London, which was a risk. And my parents were like, what is online coaching? Like, you just became a PT and now you're like moving out from home. They're kind of worried and concerned, and not that they didn't support me, but they were like very like concerned and just like questioned whether that was the right choice to make. So then I just doubled down on like content creation and like all of those aspects. And since then, I guess I've kind of talked about both in the same instance because they kind of were very synergistic with one another, in that my kind of growth into online coaching was through sharing my own journey. And I actually grew a lot of confidence in being able to help people through having gone through that process myself. I was like, if I've been able to do this with such a like poor physical position to have been in, I feel like I can help a lot of people. So, and then obviously learning about like the science, evidence-based, that gave me a lot of confidence. And there's just so much rubbish out there, which there still is to this day. Hopefully it's a bit less, but I'm not sure. So I don't know if that answers your question, but essentially, yeah, that kind of transition towards bodybuilding. I've always been super interested in like physical endeavors and loved them. And it just, I think that accident really led to me kind of digging my heels into bodybuilding, because it was something that I felt I had lots of control over. And I'm a bit of a control freak, and I love the kind of like taking care of my nutrition, taking care of my training. If I get these two inputs right, I see a result, and I love that aspect. And it's all on me versus like other people potentially. And then like the personal training aspect came from just loving the educational side, wanting to help other people do that, and kind of giving them what it gave to me in terms of like improving my health, well-being, having control over those factors and not feeling lost. And then when I found all these smart evidence-based individuals, I was like, man, I want to share this with the world. And that's kind of where the kind of podcast then started growing. And that's where it's kind of led me to today. So there's probably a lot you could pull out from that, but that's a summary of my background.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing that's really fascinating to me is everybody's story. There are common threads, I think. I think what you said about people having their why, that's kind of cliche, but it is really true. And there are elements that, as you were speaking, that resonated with me and sounded kind of familiar. I think one thing that's very clear is everybody that I think is a fitness professional, or at least the ones that I think do a good job, they make a really good career out of this, a very high level of passion, not just for helping other people, but they themselves are people. Like, there could be no cameras, nobody else in the gym. I kind of think of like Dorian Yates and his like basement gym. You know what I mean? Like, I think there's that essence to the people that are really passionate. Like, the heart of it, you love that physical endeavor, you love pushing to see what you can do. It's not quite the same thing. I never got hit by a van, but
Good.
yeah, my legs all work and stuff. So I got into the fitness industry in 2012, so I was 20 years old. I was in university for a couple of years at that point, and you know, straight A student through high school. I actually went to university. I didn't pay a cent for university through a academic scholarship, so I was actually in engineering physics. So big like math guy, and I actually remember the class I was sitting in my second year, and it was a computer programming class, and we were just going over the curriculum and whatnot, the syllabus. And I went, if I keep doing this, I'm going to sit at a desk or I'm going to work in a lab for the rest of my life. And I literally got up in the middle of my lecture. I walked out, went to our student services office. I changed all my classes. I switched universities the following semester to like a kinesiology program. Started at, in Canada, sort of the big commercial gym is Good Life. So I had started as a trainer that winter, never looked back. And similarly, my family was like, what the hell is this guy doing? Like, everyone thought I was going to be this science engineer kind of guy. I'm like, I'm going to work in the fitness industry. It took several years, honestly, until I think members of my family kind of understood it. I don't know if this echoes your experience, but I think when you just have that passion, you keep working on it, and that success inevitably comes, then it starts to click. You go, oh, okay, like I see what Steve's doing here, right? At least that was very much my experience. I did have a couple of questions from some of the stuff that you said. So you talked, the podcast kind of came organically as you grew the social media presence and all of that stuff. When did you start the podcast, and how exactly did kind of the early stages of that look like?
Yeah, so I get confused, not confused, but I need to go back and check exactly, because in my head there was a couple of ways the podcast started. One was at the time I got about 20 clients. For whatever reason, I decided, hey, I need to bring on someone else to work with on my team. So I decided to bring someone onto the team. And the reason I say 20 clients, for those that aren't aware, like it's not a huge amount of clients to have, like 20 clients. But for me at that time, I was just like, I'm happy with 20, feel comfortable I can do a good job with them. Let's bring someone onto the team. And I think I also had visions to want to work with someone. I like being part of teams. I didn't want to just be only about me. So I brought someone on, and then I was like, I wanted a way to build up his kind of reputation and get people to understand who he was and about him. So I was like, let's do a podcast so we can talk to one another and kind of like make people aware of who you are. So I think that's one reason kind of I started the podcast. But I think also the first episode on the podcast, and I think the first episode was like 2015 maybe was when it went live, or 2016. I think it was 15, was because we were bringing Mike Israetel and James Hoffman over for a seminar. And when we recorded it, it was just as a YouTube live. It wasn't actually a podcast. And I was just like, hey, that's like an invaluable thing to not have on a podcast. So I put it, and I think that's the first episode actually. And that was a lot of fun. And man, I look back at that and I cringe for so many reasons, because it was just poor quality. I had so little confidence, and it was just like not the best episode. But James and Mike, just their voices went out there a huge amount. So it did pretty well. And then after Mike and James came over, there was quite a lot of questions from people at the seminar, and there's some left over. And I just messaged him and I was like, do you mind jumping on a podcast and I can ask you these questions? And that's where the Q&As with Dr. Mike spawned. Was just, I had these questions, would you like to answer them? And we did it, and we just hit it off. He really liked it. And we basically messaged each other back and just were like, do you want to do that again? I remember thinking, and I think he maybe even actually messaged me, do you want to do another one, schedule in like a couple of weeks or whatever? And then the kind of questions with Dr. Mike just kind of started there. And then from that point, I just grew confidence in that. I'd been to seminars of like people like Brad Schoenfeld and the like James Krieger, Brett Contreras. I'd been to seminars, and so I'd met them in person. Never obviously the most confident again. So I basically shook their hand and was just like, oh, okay, cool, let's get a photo. Didn't really speak to them. But then I'd follow them up with emails and just be like, so I met you at the seminar. Would you be cool to come onto a podcast and just chat about whatever topic it might be? And it just started to grow from there. And then, so it really came from a place of wanting to share information, but also there's definitely a large selfish component where I'm just like, I get to learn from some of the best minds in the industry. And so now, as it's kind of come to be, and I think it's kind of always held this kind of in the core of it, is I try and keep up to date with what's going on within the evidence-based sphere, within hypertrophy, within bodybuilding, and the people that are having the kind of biggest voices and authorities within that space, who I respect the most. And even try and find new people if I can, which is quite hard, because sometimes you don't know like how much you want to know your guests before you bring them on. That's a mistake I've made before, is not really knowing them that well. So yeah, just trying to bring them on and then talk about some of these like new topics that are coming out. And some of my proudest episodes are bringing on people where they've never even met before. Like for the first time, they're coming onto the podcast and they're chatting. It's like, now two of the brightest minds are bouncing ideas back and forth. It's like, wow, now we're maybe even generating new ideas that would have never come about. So it's nice to feel like the podcast can play that slightly instrumental role. So I guess that's where the origins of the podcast came from, and a little bit of where it's kind of developed to.
What would you say then has been the biggest highlight in the podcast itself? I mean, I know I started listening to it because I think I had bought, I think maybe the Scientific Principles of Strength Training had come out by that point, with Mike had obviously had a hand in it, and it was Chad Wesley Smith. And at the time I was in powerlifting, was competing at the time, Chad was kind of a big name as a strength coach as well. So I loved the book. I was like, oh, love this Mike guy's like name, or something like this Mike guy's ideas. Looked his name up on Spotify and YouTube, came across an episode on your channel. And I think that's what I did at first, was I just listened to the episodes with you and Mike. And then you started getting these other guests on. And anyway, that was how I kind of first got into it. And it was just wanting to learn more from this guy who had read his book and really enjoyed it. Anyway, yeah, so my original question, what has been some of the most memorable moments that you've had hosting the podcast?
Just to talk on that book, that Scientific Principles of Strength Training for me was, this sounds extreme, but the way I always talk about it is like seeing through the matrix. Like I'd read all
Oh, it
these
is groundbreaking.
books. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd read all these books on programming, but it was like they didn't really ever put it into a principled format and like have priorities. It was just like they're just throwing these kind of ideas out. And so, yeah, getting that book was like, oh, now I actually feel like I have tools to build programs and understand what makes a good program, what doesn't. So yeah, that was groundbreaking, and they've obviously just continued to expand upon that. And that was a big reason we brought Mike over for the seminar, was like we'd seen this book, read it, and we're just like, gosh, this guy has a lot to give. And obviously James Krieger was on that book as well. But yeah, in terms of like episodes, no one episode kind of springs out to me as like that was the episode where I was just like super proud of it. But I think some of my proudest episodes probably date to the roundtables with Menno, Eric Helms, Menno Hanselmans, Eric Helms, and Mike Israetel. And because they, again, were just kind of discussing topics where they'd never spoken to one another. So it was like a very unique experience to be able to get them to go back and forth about various things where, again, these are nuanced topics where there aren't black and white answers, where they can agree on like the big principle of like progressive overload, but then it's like they might disagree on some of the ways that you like build that out into a program. And so I find those discussions really interesting because it then gets your brain going and thinking about it in a different way. And you might be like, oh yeah, I like Menno's point here, but I like Mike's point here. And then it allows you to then kind of develop your own philosophies of programming. And again, as long as the overarching principles are there, that's like a completely legit thing. So I think bringing those guys together and maybe getting them to communicate a bit more freely and feel more comfortable with one another. I don't know if that's fair to say, but I hope it did. So that then, again, outside of that, they can, I don't know, they might message now and then or email one another, like, did you see this? And kind of have back and forth. So that I think communication is just key with those sort of guys to be able to develop their thoughts, to further them. And then I think also just like being critical of one another also is good, because like if you just start like believing your own hype too much, like you can then begin to become dogmatic. So if you know you've got other smart people kind of hold you accountable, it's nice to have that kind of in a way. It's like what do research papers have to have? People come in and make sure that it's all legit. I've forgotten what the word is for that, but it's the kind of the same thing where shit testing, but I can't think of like the scientific way of saying
I'm on fewer carbs than you. I don't know.
But yeah, that's those are probably my proudest episodes of the roundtables. And I look back at them, and I recently looked back at them actually because I was thinking, oh, I'd love to redo them. And then I was like, man, not that much has changed. Do I really need to redo these? Can we just refer people to them? They're new roundtables. So I actually just did one on cardio with Menno and Eric Trexler, and I was just like, oh.
Yeah, I listened to that one.
I hope you enjoyed it, because
I did. Just think
it was real smooth, and the guys worked really well together. I think actually that's a lesson I think I've learned, is like having me plus 2 guests is about the maximum. I think that's ideal. More than that, and it starts to become a little bit tricky for everyone to get their points in, especially if people only have an hour. It's like some people can really talk, and I mean that's good, but it takes away time from other people potentially.
Something I think that's really interesting too, again, because I've followed both your podcast and your Instagram for quite a while. It's really interesting seeing some of the episodes and the guests that you've had on. I think of Mike and like the MRV stuff. I think of oh gosh, what's his name? He did is either currently doing, or he did his PhD in the stretch mediated hypertrophy.
Milo Wolf.
Milo Wolf, thank you. And it's neat because I've watched you implement some of the things from the guests you've had on your podcast and your own training. So that was something I wanted to ask you too, is like how much of an influence has having those guests on your show kind of changed maybe some of the things that you've done in your training?
Yeah, hugely. Especially with Mike, because we've had Mike over for many seminars. I've spent one-on-one time with him, and with that book again, that was a big kind of like I say, like seeing through the matrix, a bit of a game changer for me. And there's something about the way he laid out the principles that just felt very tangible. And then putting it into practice and seeing it play out, I was just like, I really like this model, and it's very predictable and it's systematic, thought out. It doesn't leave things to chance. Like there's not variables that are just like, I don't have an answer for this. Everything's considered. And that really just sparks my interest in, I can really like hold on to that and be like, I love that. I don't like doing things where I'm like, I'm just doing that because like I need to know why I'm doing a specific thing. So again, having spoken to Mike for so many hours and kind of like asking him questions, having back and forths and seeing him develop his concepts, he's definitely had a big influence. And I think that's probably obvious from the outside in, like looking at some of my training and the philosophies I have there. But then I do definitely take away, I have to be open-minded. I think you have to be open-minded if you want the best results, if you want to help people in the best way, you have to like be open to some of the things you're doing might not be the best. And you want to kind of update your knowledge and potentially modify what you're doing. So that's definitely where Milo's had an influence in the work that he's done there. And just seeing that evidence also grow and him, you'll know this, Ryan, sometimes I get this kind of imposter syndrome where I'm like, I don't know this stuff as well as them. Like, I don't know the science. I haven't got the time actually to dig into literature and read it all through and get takeaways. And I also don't have the skill set that these people have. Like, they are better at that. So I'm much happier subscribing to Mass Research Review. They can do that shit. They're much better than I'll ever be. There's no point me reading a study. Much better they read it, give me the take homes. That's a much better use of my time. And as a practitioner, like that's all you need is like the practical take homes to be able to incorporate and then see your real life experience, what's happening in front of your eyes with clients. And then that informs your approach. That's true evidence based. Coaching isn't just like follow PubMed. It's like, no, that's not the way to go. So yeah, bringing on someone like Milo or the people who are doing that research and reading that research, it's just like invaluable to have their insights. And especially because I like bringing on people who aren't just like all out researchers. They also lift, they also potentially compete. And it's kind of, I think that's the best, is like having at least a bit of both. Some of them coach, some of them don't. And actually I would say, I don't know, I'd say the majority of them probably don't coach as much as they research and as much as they kind of put into practice on their own stuff, because like, again, you can't wear every single hat. They don't spend the majority of their day coaching like us. So we have invaluable insights there too. So you kind of all have to work together to kind of bring the best mix. So yeah, definitely Mike's had the biggest influence, but every guest I would say has had an influence on me, like Greg Potter for his sleep stuff. Like I'd read Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker and I was like, wow, this is amazing. And then I started talking to Greg and I was like, oh, like actually there's things like sleep experts, of course they don't agree on everything, and like he might be overemphasizing one thing and Greg is like a little bit skeptical of that. So it's a really interesting, because sleep impacts everything, so you might as well get interested in sleep. So yeah, a lot of like Greg's work and talking to him about things has influenced me. So yeah, I can't say there's been one guest who's come on who hasn't made me think about what I'm doing, and not like change everything, but definitely consider their points. And I am always that way in like with anything in life. I'm never certain on anything. I'm always uncertain, because I think that's the only way you can really be, because science isn't giving you answers, it's just directing you towards the truth. And so that's kind of the philosophy I try and live by, which can be exhausting at the same time, because it's quite nice to have a black and white answer. Brad Schoenfeld's amazing for that. Like whenever you talk to him, he's always uses these precursors of like probably, maybe, like currently, this is what we know is best practice. He's never like black and white, this is the way. Probably doesn't help his like appeal to the broader audience, but certainly for us guys, like we very much appreciate that, and adds to his credibility.
It makes me think of, I actually just reposted this today. I'm a big like TV guy, so I follow those YouTube, Instagram pages. So have you watched Ted Lasso?
I haven't, no, because we don't have easy access in the UK.
Hey, well, I'll get a VPN or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I need to find it.
So there's this really cool scene. I won't bore you too much with it, but there's a line. I think it's a Walt Whitman quote, and it really boils down to, I think the line is just, be curious, not judgmental. And I think if there was a singular phrase, especially, when you are just dealing with science, and exercise science, physiology is an inexact science. Like there isn't a lot of literature that exists. There's always going to be gaps in literature, because there's not going to be the money in funding research like there is in pharmacology and whatever else. So I think having this open-mindedness that like, hey, maybe I am wrong, or like maybe the thing that we've been doing for 20 years, like maybe we're off base here. I think it's very cool that you're so open-minded and so willing to modify some of your approaches based on, what these like researchers and stuff present to you. I think it's really neat. Ooh, excuse me. Um,
Just on that,
yeah,
sorry.
go ahead. Yeah,
Just on that point, when I think about it, it comes from a real selfish perspective, which might interest people where like it's very much, I want to be getting the best results possible from my efforts. Like I will say the thing, like I want to make my wants my needs, or rather, no, my needs, my wants. So the things that I need, I want to want those, because I have no ego attached to the way of my programming, my philosophies there. The way I do that is just informed from what actually seems to produce the best results. It's like I don't have an attachment to certain exercises. If you to tell me, that's why I like, for example, Coach Kassem, he's coming out with like new variants. And initially I was a bit like, oh, these seem a bit like out there. And then I'm like, let's try them, because they actually make sense on paper when he describes them, a lot of the different exercises. And some of them I've kept, some of them I've run with, and other ones I've been like, I'm not too keen on that one. But I think that's where it comes from for me, is like a just full feeling of like, I want to be making sure I'm doing the best thing possible for myself, but again, also your clients. Because if, again, you just get set in your ways, like I'm not set on a certain method or like way of doing things.
And I think actually what you said there is a good point too. I think it goes back to the think good coaches and good fitness professionals at the heart of it are people that love their own training. I've had conversations with clients over the years, and we kind of felt this way. And early in my career, I think I didn't have enough confidence to say this. I would say this to anybody now. And I love coaching people. I love training people. I'm sure you get this feeling like when you have a client that does something they've never done before, like those successes feel like it's really cool. And with all of that being said, I care about my own training more than anybody else's. Like at the heart of it, like I really, really, really like being better at my craft. This I've always taken. I've always had a rule that I take it like a minimum of 2 courses in education every year. And, probably earlier in my career, it was just having tools in my toolbox to train clients and stuff like that. In today, like at this point in my career, I take courses to learn stuff to get better at my own training. It, as a byproduct, helps me coach other people, but I'm like, so I took the N1 mechanics and execution course, taking actually the J3U. I don't remember the exact title, but the J3U kind of bodybuilding course right now.
Sure.
And certainly those things will help me dealing with clients and stuff, but they're going to help me be better at my own training. And that's obviously really important, right?
Yeah.
So, actually on that note too, I know we talk a lot about you hosting a podcast and being a coach, which is something I think love diving into even more, but I also want to touch on, beyond just being a coach, you are also a guy who bodybuilds competitively. So where are you right now in terms of, I guess, kind of your competitive career? What's kind of coming up in the future for you in bodybuilding? How is your training going?
Yeah, for sure. So, like I said, my first competition season was 2014. So been doing it a while now. Yeah, it's coming next. Actually, yeah, that's quite cool. I hadn't actually reflected on, and I'm considering competing next year. That's like penciled in to be competing next year, which would be quite cool to have like a decade on kind of where I started, and then I hope I can do better next season, or to the 2024 season, because it's probably the same in like all bodybuilding endeavors, but the sport just gets, or if we can call it a sport, just keeps getting more and more competitive. Like having striated glutes was enough to get you pro back in the day, whereas now it's like novices, first timers are having striated glutes. Like it's not enough anymore. So yeah, I competed back in 2014. I did how many shows did I do? I think I did just 2 shows. I came like second last in my first show. So that was an amazing performance. That was in a novice class. And then I did another novice class and I came fourth, or I was joint third, and then I was given fourth because that's often the way it goes, right? You don't get things falling in your favor. So that was fine. It was a good experience, like to learn it and just kind of do it and see what was out there. I had no idea who I'd be up against. Like it wasn't so obvious now with social media. You can like look up a competitor's name and just see all of their physique, and it's just like, I don't know if it's good or bad or whatever it is. That ignorance is kind of bliss for me stepping on stage for the first time, because I just thought I was like, I just put myself out there. I had no expectations. Then I competed. My second season was 2017, so quite a ways on, 3 years off season. I didn't improve as much as I hoped, and that really made me double down on my programming, what I was doing. What could I do better? And that's where I really started to make sure my training was specific towards bodybuilding, and my nutrition was setting me up for success, because I was holding myself back, trying to stay too lean and too set on partitioning ratios, because back then it hadn't been debunked. It was kind of like that was the science, and it wasn't. And so I still like hung my hat on that, and that wasn't any good. But in that season I did better. So I was then in the open classes. I managed to qualify for 2 finals, and I came third at one of them and fifth in the other one. So did fine. I was like pretty happy with those performances. And then I just competed in 2021, and I did a lot of shows. I think there was like 6 or 7 shows I ended up doing, because I was just like, yeah, fuck it, let's just do so many shows. So I managed the best kind of outcome I got for that season. I won my first show. So I won a qualifier. It doesn't really matter. I always say this, like a qualifier, you just need to qualify. But I did win it, and it was an incredible feeling, to be honest. I kind of hate that it was an incredible feeling, because I know how little it matters. But in that moment, it was very validating as a bodybuilder to be like, wow, like I can win a show. But the best performance was I managed to get to WMBF, which is the biggest natural bodybuilding federation. And I managed to get to their world finals, and I came second in the amateur ranks. So I'm not a pro or anything. I never thought I could go pro, but that is now like, it's on the horizon, I feel like, for me, where I'm like, maybe I could get there. If things fall in my favor, I could get there, but I still have big self-doubt. I don't have self-doubt in muscularity. I don't have self-doubt in condition. It's the things that aren't in my control that I am just worried that they will count too much against me for me to score well enough in symmetry, essentially, where I'm just like, I do not have these like broad shoulders, small waist, sweeping quads, like nice muscle bellies. I have lots of muscle on my physique, and I can get really conditioned, and I can pose it quite well in the muscularity round, but there's no hiding some of these things in like the front relax, which is my worst pose, and it's the one that counts the most. So yeah, I don't count myself out, and I'm definitely going to do my all-time best. But again, I have no expectation of going pro. If it happens, amazing. But I'm just going to go out there and do my best. And like I said, maybe 2024, if I feel like I've improved enough when I start that journey dieting down, then I will. But if life's simple, if life isn't stressful, because you never know what's going to happen. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at and where I'm looking to go. Judging, just to speak on it, I judged last year, and I'm going to be judging again this year at some shows.
Oh, very cool.
It was eye-opening. It was very eye-opening to me to how judging actually works from a scorecard perspective. I think different federations obviously work differently, but I think a lot of them will probably have this kind of similarity in terms of, at least for bodybuilding, they have a symmetry round. You do not judge anything but symmetry when you're doing the relax poses. And then it's a muscularity and conditioning, which is then judged in the like the other round where you're actually posing properly and you're not in the relax shot. So that's where I'm like, I can't, like, I have to hold on as best as I can to dear life for the symmetry round, and then destroy as best as I can in the muscularity round, where I'm like, no doubt, number one in the muscularity round. Like, I can't let that happen. Like, anything worse than that, I'll score too low on this other thing. It reminds me of, like, I don't know, for some jobs when I was trying to get like on graduate schemes back way when, like, there was a numerical reasoning and like, what's the other one? Like English and maths basically is what it was. Literacy and the numerical basically. And I was very good at the numerical, but terrible at the literacy. It was like, or I can't actually even remember which way around it was, but you needed to do like on average above 50% or whatever score, and you'd get through. I remember on one of them, I basically got 0 on one and 100% in the other, and I got through to the graduate scheme. I was just, this is kind of what I need to do here. I need like 100% muscularity round and not get, if I can not get 0 or not come last, I need to somehow scrape through on the symmetry. So yeah, that's kind of where my head's at with it.
It's how I used to feel powerlifting, because I had a pretty good squat. My bench press is pretty good. And literally, I think until my very last meet that I ever did, I always out squatted my deadlift. So it was like, I gotta smoke guys squatting and benching, and then just like hold on for dear life and hope they don't outpull me by, 100 kilos, which probably happened like a handful of times. So,
That's
it's
a great
interesting.
example.
So yeah, it's the same idea, right? And you
Yeah.
try to play to your strengths. It's interesting hearing this too. First of all, I want to say again, following along your stuff, like you look absolutely jacked compared to even a couple years ago. I was joking. So before we got on here, I just commented on your story. I think it was, you were like, how to look like you're on PEDs without being PEDs, and it's like posing the window or whatever. But since you're wearing the thing, it looks like you are significantly bigger than a couple of years ago. Um, I'm actually like in the process of prepping for my first show, which has been really cool, really eye-opening experience. I find it like, as I'm sure you could probably relate, the level of meticulousness and turning all the dials and stuff is really, really fun for me.
Yeah.
But it is a little nerve-wracking, because if you're competitive and you care, like you want to do well, and there's this element of like, I gotta make sure like I'm piecing it together just the right way. You never know who's gonna show up. I actually just made the call yesterday. I had originally planned, so I started from January 2nd. And the original plan was doing the Vancouver Open in Canada, July 8th. So it would have been, I think, just under like a 26-week prep. And I had always kind of planned to get really, like I want to get into shape really early and then have some flexibility towards the latter half. And as it was getting closer and closer and closer, I'm like, I feel pretty close right now. Like, 11 weeks, 12 weeks is pretty far away. So, had some people look at me over the weekend and came to the decision I'm actually going to compete in 4 weeks. So yeah, so like 5 weeks would feel perfect. 4 weeks, I'm like, oh fuck, like, pedal to the floor a little bit here. So I don't think in natural they have classic, correct?
They actually
Do
have
they?
started to introduce it in quite
Okay.
a few federations. Yeah.
Okay.
Not in the
I knew.
WNBF at the moment.
Okay, because the Canadian organization is the CPA, Canadian Physique Alliance, I think it is, which is IFBB affiliated. And in classic, you have to deal with the weight cap. So I feel you in terms of not having necessarily the pretty structure. I'm in this weird place where I don't really think I have a classic structure. Like I don't have this really wide, like, nice looking upper body, all of this stuff. I have a fair amount of muscle. Like I am still 13 or 14 pounds over the weight cap currently. I'm like ab veins, like there's a little bit of fat left to pull, but there's the weight cap starts feeling really impressive and starts getting kind of stressful just to be able to make
Yeah.
it. So it'll I'll keep you posted, but it's going to be an interesting experience for sure. I did want to ask actually on that note too. This is something I've been finding as I'm trying to, move into this space a little bit more of an effort into social media. How have you found your success or even just documenting your own training? Like how has your success as a bodybuilder influenced your business as a coach?
Really good question. Because the way I got into social media and the way that I first got my initial clients was just documenting. that was my process that was my social media content, was just documentation, sharing physique shots, for sharing like training sessions, vlogging that. Like that was everything to me. It was only until the last, I don't know, like couple of years where I still document, but it's, I don't know, maybe a quarter of my feed versus like 60-75% of my feed. And I've moved further towards like education, sharing client results, those sort of aspects as well. And yeah, it's interesting to me because I had already thought about this, because I was thinking 2021, it's been my best season as a natural bodybuilder. I put on legitimately 10 pounds of stage weight. So what you said there, like from 2014 to 2017, I was basically the same stage weight. I was a bit leaner. I put on some muscle, but nothing significant. 2017 to 2021, put on 10 pounds of stage weight. Like it was ridiculous. The improvement I made, and I was super happy about that. And I thought, well, like given the fact that I came second at Worlds, surely this like 2022, I'm going to have like a lot of competitors. And I didn't have that many. I think I actually only had like one competitive client that season. And I was like, huh. Like I would have thought there'd be some correlation with like how that all went, and I did pretty well. And then this year I've got the most competitors I've ever had. So I've got like, I think I've got over 10, which is the first time I've had over 10 people on stage in one single year. And that's incredible. I was just, I actually don't know where that's come from, because like I only had one person to show last year and I didn't compete last year. So I don't know what's led to then this year being the thing. So I can say like my own progression in my own kind of like physique has influenced my success as an online coach to a certain degree, but actually how my competitions go, which is quite nice, because actually thinking in 2024, if I do compete, maybe I don't even get to Worlds, maybe I don't qualify. Like that could happen. You never know. I could do worse, and that hopefully won't impact my coaching in a nice way, because you'd think it could for some people. So I think that's nice that the kind of coaching isn't determined by my success as a bodybuilder, because I think that would be really a scary thing then.
Me, I'm going to speak out of both sides of my mouth here a little bit. Um, I think just from the outside looking in, competitors are obviously going to be the people who, they take their training more seriously. It's probably, I don't want to say it's more important to them, but definitely people who are getting on stage, there's just a level of seriousness that they're going to have, right? Yeah, you would hope. I don't know. There are times otherwise where people are like, I'm going to compete because I saw girls on Instagram think I can do a show in 5 weeks, or like maybe 25 weeks. But I think, competitors who take their training seriously, you seek out people who you think are knowledgeable, who coach well, like you're pickier, right? So I would almost, I would almost say the fact that you have more of those competitive clients, even if it doesn't necessarily like your competitive history doesn't necessarily reflect whether you're working with competitors or not, it's probably an indication of people's trust in you and the quality of service that you bring as a coach. So I think that's probably a direct correlation. And it's a word of mouth business too, right? Like,
Yeah,
clearly you're doing something right if those people are coming to you more and more. The other thing that I was thinking, and this is something that's been in my head, it's maybe a YouTube video I saw, I want to say 2 months ago, something like that. And it has stuck with me. It was a Chris Bumstead video. I feel anybody who's ever lifted a weight since 2018 knows who he is. So it was just like a vlog type thing, and he was talking about some of the businesses. He's launched a Raw, the Savage stuff. So all kind of his business ventures that he's been involved in, and he was, talking about how busy he was, and he was in the warehouse all the time. I think at the initial stages of his prep for the past Olympia. And he took a step back, and I think he hired people to do some of the operations. And the thing that he said that like really resonated was, he was like, none of these businesses exist if I don't win Olympias. So he's like, my job is to win the Olympia. And it just like, it stuck with me. So mean, I have zero aspirations of winning an Olympia, but I go, hey, like, if I do a good job at this show and I do a good job, like the more I do this, like that directly impacts my success professionally. At least that's the way I frame it in my head.
Yeah.
I don't know if you feel that way as well, but it was just something that really, really stuck with me and kind of added
Yeah.
this, whether it's a good or a bad thing, I don't know, but it like adds this extra layer of pressure to it.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. And I think for Chris, he's not wrong, because
Yeah.
that is why he's so
Yeah.
well known. But I think it depends where you've kind of developed your brand from, I guess. So for me, I think a lot of what Revive Stronger talk about is like doing your best job, like informing people that there are differences in genetics and lifestyle and how much muscle you can gain. And so I think because we've built it off that, people don't have they don't have those expectations for me, because it's not like I built the brand off like you can do anything, you can achieve your best if you put all your hard work and effort into it. Like, no, like that's not right. So I think possibly if you have that, like you give out that same kind of information to people, I think they'll just look at you and be like, we know you did your best, Ryan. Like, we already know, like, it's out of your hands when you get to stage. And I remember talking to Mike Israetel, I don't know how many years ago, this is probably like 4 or 5 years ago. And he was like, I just remember him saying, do you have aspirations to go pro? And I was like, oh, I don't know. I don't think I ever could. He was like, I actually think you going pro as a bodybuilder would hurt your business, because you are looked at as someone who is like, I don't know, the people's guy. Like, you're not special by any means. You are like, you've taken average to being pretty good, but not up to the top. Whereas if you go pro, maybe people look at you and be like, he's too far away from anything that I could ever aspire to. And that's a lot of the audience I have are those who maybe are similar to yourself. And I know I don't have special genetics or anything special about me physique wise, in that sense. So yeah, I think if you are similar that way and you don't talk about it from a perspective like, you can be anything you want to be if you just work hard enough or anything like that, I think you'll be just fine.
Well, I feel like that is a little disingenuous. I mean, I think there's an element of, like you'll never find out unless you try. And I do think that there's a lot of power in putting your heart into something and whatnot.
Oh, yeah.
Boy, like, I mean, I know everyone's probably made this comparison, but genetics matter above all else, especially in athletics. Like, and we kind of forget that in bodybuilding. And I don't think it should stop people from pursuing it and trying really hard. Like, hell, I don't know what my, genetic predisposition is. Like, I'll find out. I have no choice in it. Like, I'm not going to train myself into being Kai Green or Phil or whatever. And everyone's cool with that when they're like, you know what, Shaquille O'Neal was 7'1" and 370 pounds when he was playing. Like, those are his genetics. No one's 5'8" and was like, if I shoot enough basketballs, I'm going to be 7 feet. So I think there's this element of like, on one hand, boy, do I think it's like a cool endeavor to like work really hard at it and try to learn and do all this stuff. Like, I find it to be a real blast. And I think you learn a lot about yourself through that process. But maybe just the competitive outcome, like whether you win or you lose, like it happens or it doesn't happen. And I don't know if that matters as much for maybe, I hate to say it, guys like you and me, but like you said, yeah, Chris and those guys, certainly. I mean, that is their livelihood, right? So did have another question. I may not remember it now.
I always, just on your point there, I always just think like, again, 2014, I came second last in that first show. Like, it wasn't good. It wasn't good. If I had placed my heart on I'm competing and what matters to me most is the outcome, I'd have stopped at that show. And I wouldn't have got to the point where I've gone to the world finals for like natural bodybuilding. Like, wow, that's crazy. So I like to be an example of, you don't have to have just like made it initially. so long as you're progressing, like one of my favorite quotes, I think it even comes from Will Smith or something, is like, progress is happiness. Just like, so long as I'm progressing with something, and this is why I love bodybuilding, because every day you can just be depositing pennies into a bank of like, yeah, I got my sleep, I got my training, like I got my nutrition nailed. I like that. I can't imagine waking up and not having like a sense of direction in that regard. Like, I did my job at work. Like, I don't know, it's not enough for me.
I agree
So
with that.
yeah, I like, and I think more people are moving towards that, because I mean, for there to be winners, there has to be a heck of a lot of losers. There has to be people like me turning up all the time, and like, so like, there's no sport without that if there's only the best doing it. So I think it's so important to enjoy that process, and I try and dial that into my clients. I just had one of my clients competed this weekend, and I was distraught for him because he came third in his lineup, which was last. And from seeing like the photos and everything, I thought he was on the running to like take it. It must have been close, or I must have not been able to see something in the photos I was seeing. And I just like, my heart just sank. And he came back to me and he was just like, Steve, it's totally cool. Like, coming third's fine. Like, I had no expectation of winning. Winning doesn't make me a better person. We brought the best physique to stage that we possibly could. And that's all I could ask for. And I was like, man, I'm so proud of you. Like, it's just so heartwarming to hear that from him.
So, I think that's kind of a good note to maybe end today on. I think I'm not going to say anything more profound than that. So I know we've obviously talked about a lot, and the name is in the background there, but let's let people know if they want to reach out to you, if they want coaching, whatever it is, where can they find you? How can they get a hold of you?
Sure. So yeah, thank you very much for this, Ryan. And yeah, hopefully people got some value from it. It was fun chatting. So I think, yeah, if people want to find, most of everything we do is at revivestronger.com. You should be able to find it there. The podcast is the Revive Stronger podcast. You can find that on YouTube or any podcast platform. We also have the Improvement Season, which is on YouTube, the same YouTube as our like Revive Stronger podcast. But if you're looking for it on like Spotify or something, that's on a separate channel, just because we decided to separate them because they're a little bit different. That's where I talk with Pascal Floor, who's like my business partner, is a bit more like just chit chat versus like a topic of discussion. And then if people want to find more from me, I'm most kind of active over on Revive Stronger on Instagram. That's everything there.
Well, again, I want to say thank you so much. I said this kind of at the beginning, but it is a tremendous privilege for me to be able to do this. Kind of had in the beginning, in my head at the very beginning when I was like, you know what, I think I'm going to take a run at this. I'm going to start running my podcast formally and all this stuff. I was like, Dee's one of the first people I'm going to get a hold of. I don't know if you remember this, but I did these Instagram live videos, I guess 3 years ago when COVID happened. And that was sort of my first opportunity where you and I did something similar, but like informally.
I'm glad you said it, because now I was like, I know we've done something
Yeah,
like this before. And I was like, this is the first time it's a podcast. So I
yeah,
couldn't remember what it was exactly. You've
yeah. So
completely transformed your physique. I was making
thank
sure you're the
you.
same guy.
Yeah,
Yeah, I like saw your physique, I don't know, like a year ago or so. I don't know when it was. And I was like, Jesus, is this the same guy? He has got, you were big before, but now you're like
yeah.
huge.
Well, thank you. I mean, I teased you before we got actually recording here, but I literally was like, oh, you know what? I'll wear a long sleeve shirt. Like, I won't throw a tank top on. Maybe it feels a little vain. And then as soon as your video comes on, I'm like, oh, this guy's shoulders are out. Like, what was I doing? But no, thank you. I appreciate it. It's definitely, it's been very cool. I'm really enjoying, honestly, like, I think I've enjoyed my short time bodybuilding more than I ever enjoyed powerlifting. And it's been a blast. But again, I'm incredibly appreciative. You taking the time to come on here. It does mean a lot to me as someone who has listened to your podcast a lot, as someone who I think has been, as your social media and everything has grown quite a bit. I think it's what, 28 or 29,000. It's a lot of volume with people, I imagine, reaching out and all this stuff. And you've always been very courteous, getting back to me, chit chatting, kind of thing. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you very much for coming on. I hope it's something we can do again in the future. With that, I will let you get on with your evening because it's what, 6 p.m. there?
Yeah, I've got a few more check-ins to do, I think, and then some food.
Yeah, food for me as well.
Thank you. It's great to be in. I'm glad you reminded me of where we initially had that interaction, because I knew there was something like that. I just was like, I'm not going to say anything because I'm just going to embarrass myself because I can't specifically remember where.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been fun, and I'm definitely down for doing this again.
Awesome. All right, have a good one, Steve. Thanks so much.
Cheers.